So after this last video I did about Talos, which is Sidero is the official name now, um, somebody, Lucenti from Twitch, mentioned, and I'm going to read his paragraph exactly. It's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought of it until I wrote it. Intel already has Intel Management Engine, and AMD already has AMD Secure Technology, which are pretty much very tiny operating systems living inside the CPU. Wouldn't it be just the next step for Intel AMD ARM to simply ship hardware for the enterprise with Kubernetes functionality already built in? Um, and I want to think about that for a second. I mean, I think the first thing that came to my mind was like back in the old days when people would, you guys had to be old to know this. You had to be, almost as old as a boomer to know this. But, when Doom came out, that ray tracing in the Doom game, that's, groundbreaking ray tracing, that amazing algorithm was not hardware. It was all software. And so Doom was slow. I mean, it was really low res and everything. And then what happened? And then the algorithms for ray tracing and things like that got started to get people started. I mean, the idea of a graphic processing unit emerged. It was like, well, hey, what if we speed up the graphics by putting all of those things over here on this hardware over here, which can do things, at light speed versus, software speed. And and boom, the birth of GPU. I mean, this is God. If you look back, if you were back, people playing Doom, you go, one day the software that's going to be used, the hardware that's going to be developed to make your Doom game run faster, i.e., Quake, is going to be used to mine cryptocurrencies and to crunch data and numbers and solve problems all over the world, right? And people think you're crazy. Like, in fact, one day the entire graphics, ray tracing stuff will not only be encapsulated in the hardware, but it will be accessible through a common open API for all graphics called OpenGL, which was built on DirectX. The reason I'm bringing this in here is because this suggestion that someday some kind of hardware might be able to provide the Kubernetes integration layer is kind of in the same sense, the same place as that. But I want to add one caveat to that. You can't upgrade your GPU. You can upgrade your GPU driver, right? So whatever it is, it can't be embedded in the chip, because if it's embedded in the chip, that would mean that you would now have firmware associated. So, I mean, think about that for a second, right? I mean, it's possible. I guess the notion that the next logical step after we get all this Kubernetes on hardware stuff sorted out and the operating systems start emerging, like Talos, which just boots up off the network, and every time your computer reboots, it's got the most recent one. It's totally ephemeral and atomic. It can't be messed around with, and it's just there. It's just resources that get added to your Kubernetes cluster. Boom. That's happening, and the race is on for that. But what's the next race? The next race is going to be to take that teeny tiny OS, which isn't a hypervisor, by the way. So this is the thing I find this very fascinating about this, is because the Intel was a VTL chip that came out that allowed the hypervisor, the VMware software hypervisor, to be accelerated through the hardware. That was brought about by a software thing. So it started, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that started out as a software thing, and then it became a hardware thing, type 1, right? And to this day, the KVM versus Zen, KVM has only hardware, and Zen supports hardware or software, type 1 or type 2. The point being that it could be that we get the operating system so minimal that we start to see the operating system at that level become merged with the BIOS and the firmware of the chip itself. And that we could start seeing either that, or we start to see additional devices show up where, people are, I don't know how we would do it. It wouldn't be a PCI bus thing. It would be too slow, right? There would have to be some extra hardware, but it's very possible. And if anybody knows anything about that, please leave a note in the comments or come on to the stream and let me know, because we're talking about 10, 20 years down the line at that point. But that when we start to see that, we're going to start seeing computers plugged into the enterprise in the Kubernetes the same way that you would plug RAM into your computer to change it. Or, and we see some CPUs that are, you could change those things out. So it's a super exciting idea. I don't know if they're going to have it together to do it. And of course, the standards and the APIs themselves are still in massive flux related to hardware management. But the cluster. Let me think about this for a second. God, I got to write this down. So the cluster API 1.0 just came out. So this is a solid. I mean, assuming that it gets so mature that the cluster API itself is enough for hardware manufacturers to build on. Can you imagine that? You could build hardware that already it doesn't have a provider. It's the provider is the hardware, and then make it so that it could be updated. Yeah. So like, what if chip makers provide create providers in as firmware. That's what it would be, right? It would be firmware because it would be embedded chip. In other words, what if Kubernetes OSes are shipped with chips? And these are just some fun possibilities. I don't know if any of that's actually going to happen, but what if it did? How would that affect our world? What would happen there? Cloud. I don't know how to bare metal, I guess. Kubernetes. And so anyway, if you have any thoughts on that, please leave them in the comments. I just wanted to say it because that thought hadn't occurred to me when I finished the Talos thing. But that's where we'll go next, right? So for right now, I'm going to be focusing all my attention on which OS is going to win in this thing. And also, by the way, this just reemphasizes for me how important knowing how to code a controller is, because controllers are the ways to install and manage Kubernetes software, even though they're going to put strain on etcd. I still think that's the way to go because a lot of people are talking about that. So this has influenced a bunch of decisions related to what I'm going to learn going forward. Comment from Twitch. I would think it would just be hardware with enough software to netboot a Kate's OS and plug itself into the cluster, which is exactly what Talos is. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what Talos is. Talos comes with a net bootable image, and you just set your BIOS to boot off the netboot image. It downloads the thing. So I guess your point is is that it's already there. And how about this? Perhaps we already have it, right? With netboot. Wouldn't it be fun to see netboot get popular again? Have it, you know what I mean? Perhaps we already have it with netboot. You know what? I think you are onto something, Killtop. So all those people, goddamn, all those people who have never learned netboot, I mean, come on, it almost seems like the whole virtual. Oh my God, this is like crazy. So the entire virtual machine virtualization craze has pretty much obliterated the skill sets in the industry for netbooting. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. And it's funny because this isn't even an original thought. Somebody who is a really, really strong veteran in the industry, in the ops space, much more than me, higher percentage of ops. I'm pretty high software dev as well as ops, but much more ops percentage, suggested to me, says, you need to teach people how to learn how to do netboot and that kind of thing, because that's the next place where this is going. Because if you can netboot a Kubernetes aware OS, then the firmware is so small that it just has to be downloaded like that, then we're already there. And that goddamn, that Talos already does that. Talos already does that. Sidero already has netboot. So, I think we just answered the question. It makes no sense for a chip manufacturer to spend a dime coming up with another thing, because that is already built into everything they've already got. What that means is the chip manufacturers are going to start putting their weight behind people who, operating systems that allow them to netboot. There's going to be, I bet you it's more likely that we're going to see collaborations between Talos and Intel and AMD and stuff like that. because they're going to need to have like really low level and and Nvidia. The companies like Talos that are operating system companies fundamentally are going to now have to be really like Canonical. They're going to have to strongly court and keep up to date with all of the device manufacturers, because their entire fate depends on supporting as much hardware as possible out of the box, because you can't configure anything. And that's my greatest concern. My greatest concern about Talos is that it's not going to run the latest, custom NVIDIA driver that NVIDIA themselves gave us to test, that hasn't been released on the open market. And if they don't provide that, companies will not buy into this idea. I mean, some of the DevOps companies will, but the ones that are doing high performance computing and stuff, they won't, because a lot of their bottom line is being driven by creating Vulkan integrations that do the stuff that we're doing with Vulkan. I can't even talk about it, but it has nothing to do with game development. I'll just put it this way: Vulkan right now is being and OpenGL is being used to do like lightning fast 3D simulations in real time from sensor data that's being received immediately, in order to make real-time machine learning calculations and modify things such as, docking spacecraft, that kind of thing. And those kinds of sensors and operations need to have a 3D processor that's built in, which means that these GPU units have to be built in, which means they need to be supported, and they have multiple GPU thing. So, and if you're going to deploy any of that, like even on edge computing with the K3 OS kind of stuff, like say you have a robotic rover and it's walking around Mars and everything, it's going to need to have all of its systems synchronized very well. And that's what K3 OS is entirely designed to do. And a piece of that, I mean, if you use so this is interesting, because the K3 OS people, we haven't even talked about this yet. The K3 OS people are 100% focused on edge. They're not edge and robotic and that kind of thing. They don't care about the broader audience. And that's actually, so K3 OS is, and micro Kubernetes actually, they are entirely dedicating their efforts towards that. Whereas Talos is more generically saying any device, no matter what, and without removing any of the bare Kubernetes API. They're not pulling pieces. Actually, no, they're not. They're not dumbing it down. Or if they are dumbing it down, you don't know it, because it's all behind the API. Right. I mean, you don't even know if there's a kubelet on there, because you don't need to know whether there's a kubelet on there. All you need to know is whether it talks to the API or not. So they could be implementing the entire API, and they could be doing the same thing K3 OS is doing, but they're not providing any SSH access, so you wouldn't need to complain about the fact that there's no kubeADM on the system, because you can't even get to it anyway. Right? So that's a fun topic. I'm just saying, if you have anything to say on that, please let me know, or join us on the stream and kind of give us your stuff. I'm going to close this video. Have a great day.